Hi guys, welcome to this week's deep dive. A little bit of a different setup this time. What we wanted to do was change the format slightly, so we're opening up deep dive, so it isn't just attached to right now, so we can actually have more guests and actually make this more practical for you and speak about things that are affecting your everyday life. Now, we can see the debts and the prices of gas and oil going up all over the place, and there's reasons for this happening. So we wanted to discuss things that give you some advice on what you could possibly do and help you understand that there's a reason why these things happen, and the mainstream media won't be telling you exactly how it happens, and whether they understand or not, I have no idea, but they won't be telling you this. We have a lady called Lindsay coming on to talk about the cost of living and what you can do later on in the show, so I just wanted to cover some points. So we have a new PM, Liz Truss, and she gave her first speech outside Downing Street last night. Now, does it make any difference who is the Prime Minister? My personal opinion, I don't believe it does. I think these people are selected, not elected. She gave her first speech. It was a bit kind of bland, but the thing she's got to have a look at now, and I do feel for her a bit, I think she's been thrown under the bus a bit, is dealing with this cost of living.
We'll get spades in the ground to make sure people are not facing unaffordable energy bills, and we will also make sure that we are building hospitals, schools, roads and broadband. Secondly, I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war.
Now, of course, we've seen this come about because of what's happened with the last 2 years with COVID. The lockdowns were inevitably going to lead to the fact that no one's got any money. Now, what seems to be happening here is they're getting rid of the middle class. So you're going to have the poor, the working class, and you're going to have the upper class and the elite, and no one in the middle there at all. So this will be an attack on the middle class here, and your gas and electric bills will be part of that.
I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply.
So I tried to find out where this money would be borrowed from, and it's incredibly hard to find out where this money will actually be borrowed from, who actually owns these bonds. So the way it appears to work, from my understanding, is that the government will loan money from investors, insurers, private banks in the form of bonds, selling bonds. So this will be like an IOU, and you'll have to pay it back plus interest later on, and it could be 6 months down the line, it could be a year down the line. So they'll inject that money into the system to cover what Liz Truss will put forward as I think she's looking at about 130 billion borrowed from the private banks and the insurers, and you can't find out who these people actually are. You really can't. I find it everywhere. And then that will be paid back plus interest. Now, where does this interest come from? If there's not enough money in the pot, how do you put more money in the pot? They're printing money out of nothing anyway. So this interest doesn't exist. So what we live in is a debt-based society. So say I have 20 quid and I pay John 20 quid to come around and fix my sink. Well, I've just given him 20 quid and he's paid 20 quid off of his loan, but now I'm 20 quid in debt. So we're just swapping debt, that's all we're doing. We're just passing the debt around and they're ciphering the money out. It's a complete con trick, and obviously private banks, they print the money out of thin air. They just go on there, type it out, there's £2,000 plus interest, come out of thin air, and where does the interest come from? It doesn't exist. It never existed. I tried to look everywhere, the London Economic, the Treasury debt, so it says who owns our national debt, and it says it's a secret. The London Economic, the Treasury Debt Management Office refuses to say who buys the government's bonds and gilts, but open source material suggests US assets managers are big creditors. So US asset managers are big creditors, which will be your private investors. So what's the difference between a deficit and a debt? That's a good place to start, because I, for one, didn't know until a few months back what really the difference was. So a deficit is when the government spends more money than it receives in tax and other revenues, and it borrows to cover the difference. So in our tax, if we're not working enough, we're not paying a big enough tax, we don't have enough to cover our costs. It's as simple as that. So then you might be asking, why are we sending billions to Ukraine when we don't have billions? Where do you think that billions come from? Well, they come from the private banks. That's where it will be loaned from. So that's our deficit. So the deficit is the difference between what we made and what we spent. Pretty simple. If you make 100 quid, but you spend 200 quid, your deficit is 100 quid. So your debt is the amount that the UK has borrowed over the years. And so the UK debt rises with the deficit. So once the deficit goes up, the debt rises. Now, in April of this year, the UK public sector Net debt was basically our debt, was 2,347.7 billion. I don't know how that makes you feel when you look in your bank. It's got about 20 now. And this was designed. Now, whether you believe the coronavirus was a real thing or not, the lockdowns were clearly not necessary, in my opinion. And the lockdowns, in my opinion, and you can see a lot of this run through the World Economic Forum, and this is why, was to skin out the middle class.
I don't know how it will play out in November, but what we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed, and particularly also people in the grey economy, which are not counted for, who lose their jobs. So we will see definitively a lot of anger already now, but probably increased by the end of the year, because this crisis will be with us until we really have found a remedy. So we have to prepare for a more angry world, and how to prepare, it means to take the necessary action.
Then you whack on top of that, so that's the first punch, that's the left hook. The knockout punch is going to be the gas and electric prices, because what that's going to do is going to stop your pubs, your restaurants, your shops. Most businesses are not going to be able to afford, anywhere that's got an office or got a place to work, we're not going to be able to afford the gas and electric bills. So what's going to happen?
The line of need appeared an hour before the food bank even opened. The pressures facing this neighbourhood in East London are felt across the country. Britain's next Prime Minister faces a long list of challenges, but perhaps the most pressing is how to tackle the cost of living crisis so people stay fed and warm this winter.
Coronavirus, lockdowns, and then then all of these sanctions in Russia and Ukraine. This was all designed to make sure that you had no money and that you were desperate.
It looks so mundane, and yet it is so important. This is the Nord Stream pipeline, which has long brought gas from Russia to Europe. It's a mainstay for untold millions of people. And now it sits idle, switched off by its operator, Gazprom, Russia's biggest company, controlled by the Kremlin. It's an act of economic aggression that could be as consequential as it was inevitable.
And one of the World Economic Forum's main slogans was, "You'll own nothing and you will be happy." The first bit will definitely be right, the second bit not so much. I think they mean you'll own nothing and you'll shut your mouth and go along with it. That's probably the slogan that they really want to, but it's a bit wordy.
The health industry, the digital industry will go out of this crisis strengthened. But we know that many industries which rely particularly on physical interaction will have difficulties to survive.
3.8 million we've sent to Ukraine in aid. Now think about that when your gas and electric bill has tripled in price. So British households will see the average energy bill soar to 3,554 a year in October. And it will increase to about 5,000 by next April. They wanted people to get so desperate that they would accept the Great Reset. This is not hard to understand. These families, these private banking families, have funded both sides of most major world wars. It's problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, they get the reaction, and they provide the solution for the problem that they've caused in the first place. That's basically what's happened here. It's the same play over and over again. So they've created this situation. They're blaming Putin. He's just taken the role as the big bad guy. He's the bogeyman in this. Zelensky is the superhero, although most of the time he spends most of his time on TV dressed as a woman, dancing around, pretending he's a pop star.
All the single ladies, now put your hands up in the club, just broke up, I'm doing my own little thing.
I'm sure you've all heard of the Great Reset. It would be to do with your universal basic income. To get your universal basic income, you'll have to comply, so your social credit score will be your social compliance score. In China, we already had a social credit score. They incubated that system in China and they want to ship it over here.
They're constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now, the Chinese are also ranked, given a mark out of a possible 950 points. A score in the 700s is considered good. Around the 500 mark is not.
After I explained all that, Let's talk to Lindsay and find out what we could possibly do to sort of get around this, because if this comes, and whatever it comes, it might come now as the prices go up, or it might come later on in paying that loan back to the private banks. There are things that we can do. So let's find out from Lindsay now what we can do about this situation that we've been forced into.